Now, President Trump is threatening stiff new tariffs on Canada if it enters a trade deal with China. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney said his recent talks with Beijing comply with a deal signed by the U.S. and Mexico. Listen.
Canada respects our engagements, our commitments. We have commitments under CUSMA that not to pursue free trade agreements with non-market economies without prior notification. We have no intention of doing that with China or any other non-market economy.
Now, Trump's latest threats follow Carney's warning last week in Davos that we're experiencing a global rupture. He said the rules-based order has given way to geoeconomics, the combination of economic and geographic factors relating to international trade and specifically how countries wield that economic power to achieve their political, not just their economic goals. Economist Jeffrey Sachs is the president of UN Sustainable Development Solutions Network, and he joins us now. Good to have you here, as we heard so much in the last few days about global economics and geoeconomics in particular. You point out that in the last few days, the Trump administration has started to call this, in your words, economic statecraft. You say it's economic warfare. How so?
Well, that's actually the phrase economic statecraft that Secretary Bessent used. He said that the U.S. is waging an economic war, in essence, against Iran. He talked about the fact that during the past year, the U.S. went out to crush the Iranian economy. It went out to drive the currency to collapse and to bring people out onto the streets. And that happened. There's tremendous unrest. And Secretary Bessent said, well, things are moving in a good direction. This is really extraordinary. I thought MAGA meant looking after the United States, not going out to destroy other governments and other countries. But right now we have a kind of lawlessness in the U.S. Approach. It's very personalistic. The president just does what he wants to do. There's no congressional role. There's no claim to law. And other countries are reacting, and the markets are reacting, because this unpredictability is actually extremely dangerous for the U.S. as well as for the world economy. Why did Trump back down on the threat about Greenland last week? Well, the main factor was the stock market plummeted the day before he got to Davos. And he listened. He can't control the stock market. So he was making chaos in the international markets.
So you call it lawless, to use your words. Prime Minister Mark Carney called it a rupture in the world order at the instigation of the United States, even though he didn't name it that way. You know, ECB President Christine Lagarde said she disagreed, that she thought that was going too far. Does she have a point?
No. If you are trying to create mass unrest, bring people out on the streets, and create chaos, and then say that's going in a good direction. No, you're not going too far to call that economic warfare and to say that that's lawless. It's lawless in two senses. It's lawless in the domestic law of the United States. We have a constitution. The power to put on tariffs is in Article 1, Section 8 of our Constitution. It's not a whim of the president, but he's treating it as a whim. That issue is before the U.S. Supreme Court right now. It's definitely lawless in terms of international law, which is the UN Charter. Unfortunately, this administration sneers at the UN Charter. They forget that the United States ratified the UN Charter. It's a treaty of the United States. It is the law of the land under our Constitution, a ratified treaty. So it's not to be sneered at. And it is definitely illegal under international law for a country to use force to bring down another government. Right. And this economic strangulation is precisely that.
And you mentioned there the Supreme Court. We will see whether or not Congress will ever step in at this point. I do want to get to the issue, though, of those sanctions. And you've written extensively, you've studied this extensively in the past few decades, not just the last few months, the power of sanctions. Now, the primacy of the U.S. currency to wage that economic warfare, that is key. But on their face, sanctions against Russia, Iran, Venezuela, and I've just named three, they've hurt those countries, right? But principally, they've hurt the citizens in those countries. They've not really affected change. What explains that? Regime change, I should say.
Yes, that's a very good point. I would say the sanctions on Russia have mainly hurt the European Union. They cut themselves off from low-cost energy. Maybe Trump and his friends like that because now Europe buys liquefied natural gas from the United States at 6 times the price that it was paying for Russian gas. But the sanctions just meant that Russia rerouted its oil and gas towards Asia. So it did not bring down the Russian economy, but it did bring down German industry. The threats that Trump made threaten the U.S. economy. They scared the wits out of the international markets. It's strange. The United States borrows from the rest of the world heavily. We're running huge budget deficits, and our interest rates are rising, in part because the U.S. is not a good bet. And then what is also happening that's very important for people to understand is other countries are shifting away from using dollars. The privilege that the U.S. has, that our industry and economy has by the use of the dollar globally is going away. Now, Trump thunders about that. Anybody that threatens the U.S. dollar, they're going to hear from us. But he can't stop that because there is no way to compel third countries to use the dollar when it has been weaponized in this way.
Yeah, and people are really waiting to see if that comes to fruition on those markets, especially when we talk about things like long bonds and what those long-term interest rates are going to do. Jeffrey Sachs, we do have to leave it there. We will have you back. Appreciate it. Now,